All right, today is April 1st, 2015. I'm Shasta Quinn, and I'm here at the West Oaks Branch Library and Genealogy Center with Ms. Terry Ivy. Terry, thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed today.
Thank
How
you.
are you?
Very well, thank you very much.
All right, can you tell me how long you've lived in Ocoee?
I lived in Ocoee pretty much all my life. I was born in Ocoee, and my family came into Ocoee about 1884, but some of my family came into Florida as far back as 1830.
My goodness.
So we're old timers.
Yes. Well, can you tell me a little bit about your family, what they did here?
Well, my grandfather was, in those days, there were a lot of entrepreneurs because a lot of the people came down around the Civil War to get away from that. And they came in, and of course, Florida in those days was just palmetto and sand and pine trees. And a lot of them didn't want to go on the coast because they wanted to get into where they could plant fruit trees and that sort of thing. So they came inland rather than to go on the coast. And then, of course, they didn't have any transportation. If you went further than in those days to Miami, that was just wilderness down there, and the Indians and what have you. So he came in and he bought some property and cut down all the pine trees, set up a sawmill around Lake Rose in just outside of Ocoee, and had a lumber yard. And then they would burn all those stumps, and he set out a grove. And this happened to a lot of the people that came in around that time. And so it was a very profitable thing because the trees, they only needed so much once you had them fertilized and trimmed and what have you. Well, they were pretty much on their own because this was wonderful weather and soil. So today, of course, there's some disease that's gotten into the soil, and it's been hard on the orange trees. So that in turn has brought a lot of developers in here to buy up. So, but my grandfather and then my other grandfather, he was a doctor and came into Windermere, and he was the first postmaster at Windermere. He was, they didn't have a post office, so he got all the papers and all together, and he formed the first post office. That was quite late in life, and that was in the 1880 something. He was an old man when he did that. So.
And what were your parents like?
Well, I had some very nice family, a nice mother and a nice father. In fact, my childhood was very, very healthy. My father went to Southern College in Lakeland, and he dropped out, but just before he graduated, and went to work for the railroad. And the railroad in those days was very glamorous, and Flagler was coming in with the new trains, and a lot of the young men who were in college dropped out and joined and went to work with the railroad. It's amazing how I come across different ones that said, well, my father at work. And I think my father was very ambitious to be in the headquarters in the Carolinas, but it didn't work that way because he died quite early. So, but my father was a yip and a nope man. He was a very tall, thin man, and whatever he said, that was it. He never argued. It was yes, no, maybe, but it was usually either no or yes. He was that kind of person. And my mother was a very jovial person, and she was the caretaker of all the elderly in Ocoee, because if they didn't have anywhere to go, they would come to my mother's house, and she kept a pot of soup on the stove, and they would all there. They'd bring their T Model Fords and their Model A's, and they'd be parked out there, and they'd all be around the dining room table eating and enjoying themselves. That was that was the type of person she was, and she was well known in Ocoee for being accommodating.
And what were their names?
My mother's name was Mary Ann Hyde Griffin, and my father was Alva Lee Griffin, and my grandfather was B.L. Griffin, Benjamin Luther Griffin, and my grandfather in Windermere was Abel Griffin, Dr. Abel Griffin, and he had a huge family. And my grandmother was Dr. Abel, one of Dr. Abel Griffin's daughters, and they came down from the Carolinas, as far as I can tell, and they met up with these cousins who had come down from Georgia, and that's how my grandmother and my grandfather met. But her father now set a grove out too, over in Windermere, when he was an old fella. So, and a lot of you saw that a lot, because everyone was trying to get themselves established, and they always wanted their children to marry someone that was doing something. It wasn't, they were all very entrepreneurial and very looking down the road type of folks. And then years later, it didn't turn out that way. Well, it was, I guess. It was kind of a sad time in the 20s. Ocoee got hit with an awful lot of people that came in, and they just were absolutely, can't explain it, hard up. And they came in trucks and whatever they could get in here. And some of them have made it, and made it very well, but a lot of them did not. And it was a very hard time. And in Ocoee, we had a very prosperous black group. And the blacks were very much like the whites. They had been here long enough to own homes and to be prosperous. And Ocoee was a very prosperous town. We had five packing houses, and all the blacks were working those packing houses, and all these people came in, and that ended that. And then they had the riot, and they call it a riot. It really wasn't a riot. I mean, it wasn't. It was within two blocks. I mean, that's where it didn't go outside of the 2 blocks, so I don't call that a riot, And there was several people that were killed, and my mother said, no one could pin that on the blacks or the people that went down there. They just went down there to see what was going on, and guns were going off, and two of our neighbors got killed. And it was just, if they'd have just stayed home, the whole thing was so unnecessary and so unfortunate. But it was due to the need for jobs. They blamed it on voting and all. That was almost a ruse.
Really?
This is just my mother and my father, and but it was jobs. And Winter Garden, Winter Garden was like Ocoee, just nothing. And it had 2 families over in Winter Garden that had a stronghold, and they were holding tight. And Ocoee was industrious, and was a lot of going on, all these packing houses and all. And so then that happened, and moved over to Winter Garden. So we've seen better days in Ocoee, but at the same time, it was with a lot of people that were not educated. They were in need. It was rather grubby, I hate to say, but that was the times. And we had a lot of people coming in here, and they'd get into the groves and put lean-tos in, and they'd have a whole flock of children. And if you didn't go in and say, well, move on, times are hard, but you can't stay here. Because there was that, if you let them stay there for too long, 7 years, I think, well, it was theirs. So But my mother and father were very, very interesting people. And I'm 88 now, and I wonder how they did as well as they did, considering how the life and what have you was going on.